Guys, it's Rob from Cymet once again. Another issue comes up. It's something we run into fairly frequently because we service the racing community more often than not. One of the things that we're starting to find is in older SRAM gear, it seems like the springs in the derailleurs either lose spring rate or just aren't as strong, or just all the other connections within the derailleur are starting to wear out. What ends up happening is as you go to drop into that 11 cog, it tends not to want to drop into that 11 cog. So it'll hang up just before it wants to drop in, it will stutter like it wants to go down. We found that on CX1, a lot of the one-by stuff, even with heavier spring returns and with clutches in them, but usually we see it on the road. Usually we can have a couple different solutions to help it. It tends to be exasperated on some types of frames. Like if there's internal routing, it'll be a lot worse. In cyclocross, I know like the Trek booms, what we stumbled upon is that we need to drill out the Trek booms and run full housing the entire way. This was confirmed for us by Mark Compton, who obviously is the mechanic for Katie Compton, who's been working on it since day one. He's always done that to all of her rigs, just to be able to preserve the shifting. So it's one of the ways you want to reduce friction as much as possible. In this particular setup, it came in that exact same way. The way that you tell is you just disconnect the cable, you hold on to it, you pull one gear out, and then you hit it. You see if there's any ability for that cable to come back out or not. If you put a tiny bit of pressure on it, does the cable move back, allowing the derailleur to move over? 9 times out of 10, you're going to find it just sits there. And then if you hold onto the cable and pull, you'll find that you can pull it. That lasts a little bit. And what you feel in there is all that friction that the spring in the derailleur is no longer able to override. So what we do to troubleshoot is you disconnect the cable, check with just the housing, pull that housing off, go to the next section, see where if you can identify where that actual friction is. In this case, the it ended up being inside the shifter. This is also a common problem. What we find is that the head wants to pop out of the shifter and not ride with the carrier itself. That comes from the entire mechanism being pretty crudded up over the years. All we do is you clean out. We use spray alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and a toothbrush, and we clean it out, use compressed air to blow out any of the gunk or anything in there, and make sure that it's operating as smoothly as possible. We do tend to use a dry lube back in it, a really, really fine dry lube though, and we don't use much, because the last thing you want to do is cake it up with a bunch of extra lubrication. That's just going to get in the way and cause problems in a little bit. So once you've done that, put in a new cable, new housing, start making sure that you have the same kind of flow that you're looking for, where you can hold on to it, hit the shift lever, go back one gear, and it already starts to move on its own. That's because the head's getting carried with the carrier, and there's not friction enough in the cable system to keep it from doing it. So once you have that set up, you kind of look for that last shift and see if it's still stuttering. You want to know if it's going to drop down easily in the last gear or not. That should drop and fix most of the issues. If it doesn't fix the issue, in this particular case, it was almost there. It was still kind of stuttering, even with a good chain, even with a good cassette, even with the hanger set up straight like it's supposed to, and everything else. We've done all the good stuff, tightened everything, checked the hub, made sure there's no wiggle on the cassette, make sure the free hub body isn't worn out, all of those things. If it's still stuttering, getting into that bottom cog, one of the easiest things in the world is add a small washer to the mount itself. Just, a 1/4 millimeter, 1/2 millimeter, what have you. Just enough to get the whole derailleur body kicked out a little bit, so that the angles change enough to be able to make the spring work a little bit harder pulling it back. It works, the derailleur works better through the rest of the arc anyway. It's that last little bit that it just tends to get stuck with. So we've done that here. We've washed everything out, put a new cable, new housing on. We've put the spacer in the rear derailleur, and as you can see, it jumps down a lot better. So I know a lot of shops out there probably just bypass this and say, well, it's just ticky. It's, you know, you need a new setup, you need new components or whatever. It's important to racers because that's the gear you're going for when you're sprinting for the line. And honestly, racers don't have a ton of money to go buy a lot of new gear. So that's why we know how to work on this kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps you out.